Why do they want these newspapers? Is there anybody out there to buy them?
Well, actually, Tom, newspapers are cash flow positive when you strip away all of the excesses that surround the newspaper companies. And you're going to see a huge trend toward consolidation right now that you started to touch on. Tribune Company is selling its iconic newspapers, the Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, the Baltimore Sun, and 13 or 14 others. And
they are cash flow positive.
And most of them are cash flow positive. But they've got to change. And one of the telltale benchmark indicators is the Times, New York Times, this year made more money in circulation than it did in advertising for the first time in its history. Their digital digital edition is catching on.
Yeah, but that's just the New York Times. I don't know how you leverage that over.
It's not working with the Boston Globe. You're right.
Yeah.
Boston Globe has been digital for 18 months. They have 19,000 digital subscribers. That's why the Times is selling.
Okay, so the New York Times has some momentum, and in fact, it owns the International Herald Tribune, is getting rid of that brand.
Which they're changing the name of now,
right,
the International New York Times.
That's right.
Which was really the right move that they should have done when they bought it from the Washington Post. Because
can it sustain that momentum?
They've got an iconic brand in the New York Times. It's global. Why would you fight yourself? And they should have done the same thing with the Boston Globe, made that the New York Times, and then consolidated and got rid of all the redundant expenses.
Critical distinction here with the LA Times, which is the hippest entertainment section out there. Fine. Variety, losing the daily. This is your wheelhouse, your audience, HollywoodLife.com. They don't care about these iconic fossils, do they?
Sadly, they don't. I mean, young people just have never gotten into the habit of buying newspapers. And you know what? It's hard to buy newspapers. Right. Where do you buy them?
Exactly.
You can barely find them at the grocery store. I mean, we live in New York City, so we still have a few newsstands, but I say a few newsstands.
Okay, I want to go back to the vanity of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett has, it's like 80 newspapers, and he spent a lot of. Is it a vanity play or is it a financial transaction?
He was very clear. He said this is not a dumb financial play. He not only bought the Omaha newspaper, he bought Media General, which is 53 more newspapers, but each one of them owns the market that they're in. They're not competing. When he bought Media General, he left Tampa and a couple of other major market newspapers out of the deal because they were competing. And Bonnie's right, there are no more newsstands in most parts of the U.S. anymore. But the problem is, where are you going to go if you want to see who the star of the high school football team
is?
Oh, yeah, but stop. I've heard that argument for 20 years and nobody cares.
It works. The parents alone will buy it.
No, I'm backing you up. Local newspapers are doing much better.
That's a separate industry.
Yes,
what does the Chicago Tribune do?
Chicago Tribune's got to go heavily digital the way the New York Times is showing the industry the way to do it. And there's so much more they could do. They lost almost 75% of their classified advertising 10 years ago. Why aren't they doing classified on digital? Why are they letting Craigslist and others steal that market? There's a ton that they're going to be doing. They just, like the music industry, like the movie industry, they didn't move quickly enough.
All right, so there's an argument to be made to going into local papers the way that Mr. Warren Buffett is. What about for the Tribune Company, which is shedding newspapers to focus more on television? I mean, at some point, television is going to be disrupted as well with all the other digital media.
First of all, they are going to sell those at a premium. You're going to find Rupert Murdoch, that you touched on earlier in the show. He among others, is going to start grabbing papers like the Chicago Tribune and LA Times, because he's spinning off the print side of News Corp into a separate public company. Consolidation and saving on the cost of thousands of different expenses is going to make him a profitable business in the print business.
To both of you, and I think this is the critical distinction, you mentioned the success of the New York Times, the Financial Times, Sarah, the Wall Street Journal. There can only be so many of those, right, Bonnie?
There will be some disastrous closings, for sure.
But I think the LA Times, there's a lot of hope there because LA is a company town. It's almost like a trade, and I think the LA Times, if they push their coverage of the industry of that town, which is entertainment,
they become the new Variety.
Well, they will compete with Variety. But they have to build their digital audience as well.
And it can't, the industry will not support standalones. Look at the Washington Post. It's Washington, the epitome of company towns. But the Post is struggling. They had to sell last week their headquarters building.
What would be your prescription for Washington
consolidation
Post?
So that you can spread and amortize the expenses of putting out all of this news. The big problem that the newspaper industry faces is the fact that there's no shortage of news on the internet. But the problem is that it's got to come from somewhere, and the creators of professional, reliable, accurate, fast news are the content providers of the news.
You go to Bill Keller then at the New York Times years ago, Bonnie, it's still got to be about the conversation. You drive that every day at your company. Isn't newspapers about driving the conversation, driving the op-eds, driving the morning must-reads?
Absolutely. And people are willing to pay for original content, and they will go and become addicted to original content that really gives them value and opinion and facts. But it does need to be distributed digitally as well. And I think the New York Times because people value what they say, they are willing to pay for it. And there are other papers, and I argue that the Washington Post, people would pay for it if they have great content.
I agree with
that.
It's proving it's already changing right now. Fast. We could talk about this for like 3 hours. Sarah, can we talk about this for 3 hours?
Nope.
Well, newspapers are not dead. That's
Thank you so much.